The night she lost her name should have been the night she died. A flash of headlights, a scream of tires, and then nothing. She woke up in a world scrubbed clean of her past, clutching only a worn silver locket she couldn't remember owning. No name, no history, no one coming to claim her. But when the city's most elusive billionaire stepped into her hospital room, everything shifted. His voice was steady, his offer unbelievable. "Marry me and I'll give you $100 million. She thought it was a lifeline. She thought he was saving her. But as the cameras, the tabloids, and a vengeful ex circled like sharks, a terrifying truth emerged. Someone wanted her erased long before the accident, and the man offering salvation might be the only one who knows why. The rain fell in cold, relentless sheets, turning the city streets into a slick black mirror that reflected the indifferent neon glow of a world that had forgotten her. She clutched the one thing that felt real, an old, antique silver locket, its surface worn smooth by the touch of unknown fingers. It was cold against her skin, a small, solid anchor in a sea of hunger and loneliness. Then, a sudden blinding glare, two suns screaming toward her, the shriek of tires fighting a losing battle against the wet asphalt. The impact wasn't a sound she heard, but a force she felt, a jarring final punctuation mark that threw her world into silent, absolute darkness. She awoke to a terrifying brightness, a sterile white that burned her eyes. The air smelled of antiseptic and lemon-scented cleaner, a stark contrast to the damp earth and exhaust fumes that had been her reality. A rhythmic, metronomic beeping was the only sound in the room, a steady pulse that felt alien to her own frantic, silent heartbeat. She looked down at her hands, pale and unfamiliar, against the crisp white sheets. In one palm, still curled tightly, was the silver locket. It was the only thing she recognized in a universe that had become a terrifying blank. A doctor with kind eyes and a somber expression explained her condition in gentle, clinical terms. "Severe retrograde amnesia," he said. The words meant nothing and everything. She had no name, no past, no memory of a mother's face or a favorite song or the taste of her own birthday cake. She was a ghost, inhabiting a body with a history she couldn't access, a story with all its pages ripped out. Despair began to settle in, a cold, heavy weight in her chest. She was utterly, completely alone. Just as that crushing realization threatened to swallow her whole, the door to her hospital room opened. A man stepped inside, and the entire atmosphere of the room shifted. He was tall, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed sculpted to his frame. He moved with an effortless confidence that spoke of immense power and a world of unimaginable wealth. He was the city's most elusive CEO, a figure spoken of in hushed, reverent tones in the business pages, a man whose fortune was a modern legend built on savvy investments and a ruthless understanding of the market. He was also, she would learn, the driver of the other car in the chaotic scene that had erased her life. He stood by her bedside, his expression unreadable, a mask of cool professionalism. "I am responsible for what happened," he stated, his voice calm and even, betraying no emotion, "and I am here to make you an offer." She could only stare, confused and intimidated. What could a man like him possibly offer a person like her? He didn't wait for her to ask. "I will give you $100 million, he said, the words delivered with the same dispassionate tone one might use to order coffee. The number was so staggering, so absurd, it felt like a dream. $100 million in exchange for one thing. "You will marry me. The wedding must take place within the month." Her mind reeled, struggling to process the impossible proposition. He saw the confusion on her face and continued, laying out the terms as if it were a corporate merger. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more. A non-negotiable clause in my family's trust requires me to be married by my 35th birthday, which is in 4 weeks. Failure to do so will result in my uncle seizing control of the entire corporate empire my grandfather built. My entire patrimony is at stake. He framed it as a transaction of mutual benefit, his freedom for her security. He promised that after the wedding, after his inheritance was secured, he would dedicate his vast resources to discovering her true identity. He would hire the best investigators, the best doctors. He would give her back the life she had lost, but only after he got what he needed. She looked from his impassive face to the cold silver locket in her hand. The world outside the hospital walls was a terrifying void. She had no money, no home, no name. She was a Jane Doe, a charity case waiting to be released back onto the merciless streets. His offer wasn't a choice, it was the only lifeline in a drowning ocean. A gilded cage was still a shelter. With a voice that was barely a whisper, a sound of pure, raw desperation, she agreed. Stepping out of the hospital and into his gleaming black sedan felt like crossing a threshold into another dimension. The plush leather seats, the silent hum of the powerful engine, the city lights blurring into streaks of color through the tinted windows. It was all a sensory assault. The whiplash from the grimy alleys to this cocoon of opulent silence only deepened her sense of dislocation. She was an imposter, a ghost about to haunt a palace, bound by a contract to a man whose world was built on a capital she couldn't comprehend, and whose secrets were far more dangerous than the memories she had lost. His penthouse was less a home and more a monument to a life she couldn't imagine. It occupied the top 3 floors of a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the sprawling city lights below. The walls were adorned with modern art that felt cold and accusatory. The furniture was minimalist and severe, and the silence was so profound it seemed to have its own weight. It was a museum of wealth, a testament to a fortune so vast it had become an abstraction. For the first few days, she wandered its cavernous rooms like a phantom, her bare feet silent on the polished marble floors. She would touch the cool surface of a sculpture or run her fingers over the spine of a leather-bound book in the vast library, feeling nothing. There was no warmth, no history, no life, only the sterile perfection of immense capital. The CEO, whose name she now knew was Julian Davenport, treated her with a detached efficiency. He provided her with a personal stylist who filled an entire walk-in closet with designer clothes, shoes, and jewelry. He hired tutors to instruct her on etiquette, art history, and the complex lineage of the city's most powerful families. Each lesson felt like another layer of costume being applied, another step away from the blank slate she was, and toward a carefully constructed fabrication he required. He was not cruel, but he was distant, his eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts. Their conversations were transactional, focused on the upcoming charity gala, her public debut. "You will be scrutinized," he told her one evening, his voice as neutral as the grey suit he wore. "Smile, say little, and defer to me. Your only role is to be seen and accepted as my fiancée." The night of the gala arrived like a looming execution. She stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror, a stranger staring back at her. She was draped in a midnight blue silk gown that shimmered like a dark galaxy, a cascade of diamonds around her neck that felt heavier than chains. The woman in the mirror was beautiful, poised, and utterly empty. She was a doll Julian had dressed up to protect his patrimony, a placeholder in a life that wasn't hers. The event was a dizzying assault on the senses, a ballroom dripping with crystal chandeliers, the murmur of hundreds of conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the blinding flash of cameras. She clung to Julian's arm, her knuckles white, using his stoic presence as a shield against the curious, probing eyes of the city's elite. They were sharks circling, smelling the blood of an outsider in their pristine waters. And then the alpha predator emerged from the crowd. She was a vision of icy perfection, a woman with platinum blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon and a smile that never reached her cold blue eyes. She moved toward them with the predatory grace of a panther, her crimson dress a slash of warning. "Julian, darling," she purred, ignoring the girl on his arm completely. "I was so surprised to hear your news." Julian's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Ilara, this is my fiancé." He gestured vaguely in her direction, his voice flat. Ilara's gaze finally fell upon her, a slow, deliberate scan from head to toe that was meant to dissect and dismiss. A small, cruel smirk played on her lips. This is what you replace me with?" she asked, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. The surrounding conversations quieted. "My God, Julian, I knew you were desperate, but I didn't realize you'd gone trawling through the gutters." The word gutters hung in the air, a poisoned dart. "Tell me," Ilara continued, stepping closer, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness, "how much of his fortune did he have to promise to get you to clean up so nicely? You're a very pretty little gold digger, I'll give you that. But the stench of desperation is hard to wash off." Every word was a physical blow. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over her. She felt the blood drain from her face, her carefully constructed composure crumbling into dust. The whispers around them grew louder, the stares more pointed. She was exactly what they saw: a fraud, a nobody, a gutter snipe playing dress-up. She wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. She looked to Julian, pleading with her eyes for him to say something, to defend her. But his face was an unreadable mask of stone. He simply took her arm, his grip firm, and steered her away from his ex-fiancée without a word, leaving Ilara smiling in triumph. The rest of the evening was a blur of shame. When they finally returned to the silent penthouse, she tore the diamonds from her neck as if they were on fire. The beautiful gown felt like a costume for a fool. She fled to her assigned room, the weight of the injustice pressing down on her, suffocating her. She was trapped in this gilded cage, publicly shamed, and tied to a man who saw her as nothing more than a necessary tool for a business transaction. Collapsing onto the bed, she noticed the small, tattered bag the hospital had given her, the only remnants of her forgotten life. With trembling fingers, she emptied its meager contents: a half-eaten protein bar, a few loose coins, and a worn, dog-eared sketchbook. She had ignored it until now, afraid of what or who she might find. But now she needed an escape. She opened it, and her breath caught in her throat. The pages were filled with breathtakingly detailed drawings. There were intricate sketches of architectural marvels, Gothic cathedrals, soaring bridges, buildings she had never seen but felt in her bones. And there were faces, dozens of them, rendered with such life and emotion they seemed ready to speak. Strangers, all of them. Yet, as she traced the lines of one particular drawing, the smiling, wrinkled face of an old woman, a strange, powerful feeling washed over her, a flicker of warmth in the cold emptiness. It was a feeling of deep, profound familiarity, a whisper of a life that was hers, a clue that before she was a nameless victim, she was something more. She was an artist. This single, powerful realization, "I was an artist," did not bring back her name, but it gave her a shape. It was the first solid piece of her identity she could hold on to, more real than the borrowed diamonds or the designer clothes. For a few hours, in the dead of night, she wasn't Julian Davenport's mysterious fiancé or Ilara's gutter snipe. She was a person who created beauty, who saw the world in lines and shadows. Clutching the sketchbook to her chest, she felt a flicker of a forgotten strength, a resilience that had been buried under the rubble of her memory. It was a fragile shield, but it was a shield nonetheless. That shield, however, was about to be tested by a far more calculated and venomous assault. Ilara had left the gala not just triumphant, but enraged. The public humiliation she had inflicted was merely an appetizer. To her, Julian's engagement wasn't a personal betrayal. It was a business catastrophe. Their families had planned their union for years, a strategic merger of two immense fortunes that would have solidified their dynasty's capital for generations. This nameless girl hadn't just stolen her fiancé, she had stolen a significant portion of her future net worth, a claim to $1 billion patrimony. Humiliated and greedy, Ilara sought an ally, someone whose ambitions were as cold and sharp as her own, Julian's uncle, a man who lurked in the corporate shadows, pulling strings with the quiet patience of a spider. Their conspiracy was swift and brutal. They didn't need truth. They needed a narrative that would be impossible to disprove. Working through discreet, high-priced channels, they fabricated a past for the girl with no memory. A digital ghost was born, a professional con artist with a string of aliases and a meticulously crafted criminal record detailing fraud and theft charges against wealthy men in other states. It was a masterpiece of deceit, complete with falsified police reports and convincing witness statements from people who never existed. The story was then carefully leaked to the most ruthless tabloid in the country. The explosion was instantaneous. The headline screamed from every newsstand: CEO's homeless bride, a career criminal, Davenport fortune at risk. The story spread like a virus through the internet, a firestorm of digital outrage and public judgment. She was no longer a mystery, she was a villain. News channels ran her picture, the one from the gala looking lost and beautiful, next to a fake, grainy mugshot. Comment sections filled with vitriol, calling her a predator, a grifter, a parasite trying to latch onto the Davenport wealth. The injustice was suffocating. How could she defend a past she didn't know? The world was condemning a woman who didn't even exist. The fallout hit Julian's empire with the force of a hurricane. The board of directors, guardians of the company's vast assets and answerable to thousands of shareholders, panicked. The Davenport name was synonymous with stability and shrewd investment, not sordid scandal. The company's stock took a noticeable dip on the stock market. They called an emergency meeting. Their message to Julian blunt and uncompromising: end the engagement. The girl was a liability, a threat to their entire financial structure. His personal deadline was irrelevant. The long-term health of the corporation's capital was paramount. The pressure inside the glass fortress became unbearable. The staff, once polite and distant, now looked at her with suspicion and contempt. She could feel their whispers following her down the long, silent hallways. Julian grew even more remote, locked away in his office for hours, his face a mask of cold fury. The walls of the gilded cage were closing in, squeezing the very air from her lungs. She was the cause of it all. This man, whatever his motives, had offered her a lifeline, and in return she was dragging his name, his family's legacy, and his entire fortune through the mud. One evening, overwhelmed by shame and despair, she made a decision. She couldn't be the anchor that sank his ship. In the middle of the night, she packed the only things that were truly hers: the tattered bag, the worn sketchbook, and the silver locket. She wrote a short, simple note, leaving it on the cold marble of the kitchen island. "I'm sorry," it said. "This is better for everyone." With her heart pounding, she slipped out of the penthouse, intending to disappear back into the anonymity of the streets, to become a ghost once more. But as she stood in the lobby, waiting for the courage to step outside, she glanced at a television screen playing silently in the corner, and she froze. There on the screen was Julian. He was standing at a podium, a wall of microphones in front of him, the blinding flash of cameras reflecting in his steel-grey eyes. He had called a press conference. She expected him to announce their separation, to cut his losses and save his empire. But he did the opposite. Leaning into the microphones, his voice was not the calm, detached tone of a CEO, but something harder, something fiercely protective. The stories circulating about my fiancée are a malicious fabrication, he declared, his gaze sweeping across the room of reporters. They are baseless lies, engineered by those who wish to see me fail. She is a victim in all of this, and I will not stand by while her character is assassinated by cowards hiding behind anonymous sources. He paused, and for the first time she saw a flicker of raw emotion in his eyes. I will be using the full extent of my resources to uncover the source of this slander and bring them to justice. Our wedding will proceed as planned. Any questions regarding this matter are now closed. He turned and walked away from the podium, leaving a stunned and chaotic press corps in his wake. She stood motionless in the lobby, the doorman forgotten, the city outside ignored. He had defended her. Risking his career, his reputation, and the stability of his vast wealth, he had stood before the entire world and declared his unwavering support. It was the most noble, most courageous thing she had ever witnessed, but as the shock subsided, a new, more complicated feeling emerged. Was he protecting her, the woman he was getting to know, or was he simply protecting his deal, the one crucial asset he needed to secure his inheritance before it was too late? The line between the two was terrifyingly unclear. She walked back into the penthouse, the note she'd left on the kitchen island now looking like a foolish, cowardly artifact. The apology it contained felt hollow. He hadn't abandoned her. He had shielded her. Torn between gratitude for his public defense and the chilling uncertainty of his motives, she decided to offer him a piece of the only currency she possessed: trust. Later that evening, she found him in his study, a vast room lined with books from floor to ceiling, a testament to a different kind of wealth than the one displayed in the rest of the cold, modern penthouse. He was staring at a stock market ticker on a wide screen, the green and red numbers reflecting in his otherwise unreadable eyes. "Julian," she said, her voice soft. He turned, his focus shifting from the complex world of finance, from the ebb and flow of his massive capital, to her. She held out her hand, palm up. The antique silver locket lay in the center, looking small and insignificant in the cavernous room. "This is the only thing I have," she explained. "The only thing that feels like it was mine." He took it from her, his touch surprisingly gentle. He examined it with a focused intensity, turning it over in his long fingers. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice neutral. As she watched him, she fiddled with it, a nervous habit she'd developed, her thumb pressed against a small, almost invisible seam in the intricate floral engraving. A faint click echoed in the silent room. A tiny hinge, hidden for who knows how long, had sprung open, a hidden compartment. Her heart leaped. A picture, a name, a key to everything. Julian's calm demeanor faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something sharp and guarded in his eyes before the mask was back in place. He carefully opened the tiny door. Inside, there was no miniature portrait, no lover's lock of hair. There was only a minuscule piece of paper folded into a tight square. With the precision of a surgeon, he unfolded it. On it was a single, cryptic sequence of numbers, written in a delicate, faded ink. She stared at it, her mind racing. A code? A phone number? A bank account? "It's probably nothing," Julian said, his voice a little too quick, a little too dismissive as he folded it back up. "Old serial numbers, perhaps. Meaningless." He handed the locket back to her, but his coolness was a lie. She had seen it in his eyes. He knew what it was, or at least suspected, and he was deliberately hiding it from her. The fragile trust she had extended shattered like glass. He wasn't her protector, he was her gatekeeper. The suspicion returned with a vengeance, colder and sharper than before. The world outside the penthouse, however, was not finished with her. Ilara, publicly thwarted but privately seething, launched her next attack. This time, it was not a public smear but a surgical strike designed to frame her for a crime. A priceless sapphire necklace, a Davenport family heirloom that was a significant part of the family's tangible assets, vanished from a display case in the main living area. The staff was questioned. The security footage from the hallway camera was reviewed. And there she was, a grainy but clear image of her standing near the case late the previous night. The accusation was implicit but suffocating. The trap was closing. But Julian's world was more fortified than she knew. His head of security, a quiet, observant man named Arthur, presented Julian with a second file. It contained footage from a different angle, from a micro camera hidden in a sculpture that Ilara didn't know existed. It showed Ilara's personal assistant using a keycard provided by Ilara, placing the necklace in the pocket of a coat belonging to the girl, a coat she hadn't worn in days. The frame was exposed, the plot foiled before it could ever truly take root. Julian dealt with it silently, without confronting her. But the message was clear. The threats were real, and they were escalating. A few days later, seeking refuge from the oppressive silence and her own spiraling thoughts, she wandered into the penthouse's conservatory. A classical piece she didn't recognize was playing softly from a hidden speaker, a haunting melody on a lone piano. And then it happened. The music acted like a key, unlocking a door in her mind that had been rusted shut. A flash of memory, so powerful and vivid it made her gasp. Not a full scene, but a torrent of sensations. The kind, deeply wrinkled face of an elderly woman, her eyes sparkling with laughter. The sharp, clean smell of turpentine and oil paints. The feeling of a gentle hand on her shoulder. A sense of safety and love so profound, it brought tears to her eyes. The memory was gone as quickly as it came, leaving her breathless and shaking. But the image of the woman's face was burned into her mind. Rushing back to her room, she grabbed her sketchbook and a charcoal pencil. Her hand moved with a certainty that wasn't her own. The lines and shadows flowing onto the page as if guided by a phantom limb. Within minutes, a face stared back at her from the paper, rendered with stunning photographic accuracy. It was her, the woman from the memory. That evening, she found Julian in his study again. Without a word, she held out the sketchbook. He took it, his eyes scanning the drawing. He went pale, a deathly, shocking white that drained all the color from his face. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the book. He knew her. He knew this woman. "Who is she?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a desperate hope. Julian closed the sketchbook with a sharp snap, his face hardening back into an impenetrable mask of stone. He looked at her, his eyes cold, distant. "I don't know who you're talking about." The lie was so blatant, so cruel, it felt like a physical slap. He was not just a gatekeeper, he was a jailer, actively locking her away from her own past. The chasm of mistrust between them became a vast, uncrossable canyon. The final blow to her fragile state came from the last person she expected. Julian's uncle, the man who stood to gain the entire Davenport fortune if the wedding failed, arranged a secret meeting. He approached her not with threats, but with a face full of feigned compassion. He met her in a quiet, private corner of a public park, a neutral ground far from the penthouse's surveillance and Julian's watchful eyes. He was older than Julian, with a softer face and a smile that seemed genuine. But his eyes held the same calculating coldness she was beginning to recognize as a family trait. He spoke in a warm, paternal tone, expressing his deep concern for her well-being. "My dear girl," he began, his voice a soothing balm. "I've been watching what's been happening, and my heart breaks for you. You've been thrown into a viper's nest. Julian, he's my nephew, and I love him. But he can be ruthless. He sees this marriage as a business deal, a means to secure his inheritance. He's not thinking about the toll this is taking on you." Every word was perfectly chosen, designed to sound like a rescue. He painted a picture of her suffering, the public humiliation, the media attacks, the crushing pressure. He made it seem as if he were the only one who truly saw her as a person, not a pawn. "You don't deserve this," he said, leaning in conspiratorially. "This world of ours, with its insatiable appetite for scandal and its obsession with wealth, it will chew you up and spit you out. I want to offer you an escape." He then laid out his proposal. $10 million, a clean break. He would arrange for a new identity, a quiet life in a new city, far from the reach of the tabloids and the Davenport drama. He framed the money not as a payoff, but as a compassionate fund for her future, a way to start over with security and peace. A week ago she might have accepted. A week ago she was a desperate girl, looking for any port in a storm. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She had been tested. She had been humiliated by Elara, defended by Julian, and then lied to by him. She had discovered the artist within herself and the cold steel in her own spine. She looked at this man with his kind words and his $10 million offer, and she saw through the elaborate ruse. She saw the pure, cold ambition glittering behind his concerned gaze. He didn't want to save her. He wanted to remove her. He wasn't offering an escape. He was offering to buy her out of the game so he could claim the ultimate prize, Julian's entire fortune, the very capital his nephew was fighting to protect. Her refusal was not loud or angry. It was quiet, delivered with a newfound clarity that startled him. "Thank you for your concern, sir," she said, her voice steady. "But I made a deal with your nephew. I intend to see it through." His compassionate mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of raw fury before he smoothed it back into place. He saw that she was not the naive, broken victim he had assumed. He had underestimated her. Her resolve, which had been fragile, now hardened into something unbreakable. She understood now that running away was the weakest move she could make. Staying, marrying Julian, and facing whatever came next was her only path to power, her only chance at finding the truth. The wedding day arrived, not with the joyous peal of bells, but with the suffocating weight of an impending battle. The ceremony was to be a small, private affair at the city courthouse, a legal formality to satisfy the trust's requirements, yet the tension was as thick as any grand cathedral's incense. She stood in front of the mirror, not in a white gown, but in a simple, elegant, cream-colored suit Julian's stylist had chosen. She looked less like a bride and more like a woman, signing a multi-billion-dollar corporate contract, which, in essence, she was. Her hands were steady as she fastened the silver locket around her neck. It was her armor. Inside, the cryptic numbers felt like a secret she shared with a past she was determined to reclaim. Julian was waiting for her in the living area, looking impossibly handsome in a dark charcoal suit. His face was as unreadable as ever. They were two generals on the morning of a decisive engagement, allied by necessity, but divided by a chasm of secrets. As they prepared to leave, Arthur, the head of security, approached Julian and spoke in a low, urgent tone. "Sir, Elara just arrived downstairs. She's making a scene with the press, claiming she has an announcement that will stop the wedding." Julian's jaw tightened. Handle it. But they both knew Elara would not be handled so easily. She had planned a final dramatic spectacle, a last-ditch effort to detonate their arrangement before the ink on the marriage license could dry. The ride to the courthouse was silent and fraught. The world believed she was a con artist. Her fiancé was a man she couldn't trust, and his spurned ex-lover was waiting to publicly crucify her on the courthouse steps. Yet she felt no fear, only a cold, determined calm. She had come too far to be broken now. As their car pulled up, the scene was exactly as she'd pictured, a frenzy of reporters and cameras, and at the center of it all, Ilara, looking radiant and vengeful, holding a microphone like a weapon. This was it, the final trial by fire. Julian and she stepped out of the car, and the world erupted. A wall of sound and light hit them, the roar of shouted questions, the blinding staccato of 100 camera flashes. The reporters surged forward, a chaotic human tide held back by a line of stoic security guards. And in the middle of it all, poised on the courthouse steps like a queen addressing her subjects, was Ilara. She held a sheaf of papers in her hand, waving them for the cameras. "Here is the proof the world needs to see," she shouted, her voice amplified by a reporter's microphone. "The real history of the woman trying to steal the Davenport fortune, a professional grifter with a history of preying on the wealthy. This marriage is a fraud, an illegal attempt to seize $1 billion patrimony." She was a master performer, her face a mask of righteous indignation. The crowd ate it up, their cameras focused on her every move. The protagonist stood frozen, Julian's hand a firm, grounding presence on her lower back. She watched Ilara, not with fear, but with a strange sense of detachment. This woman, this narrative, it had nothing to do with the artist she was rediscovering, with the woman who remembered the smell of turpentine and the warmth of a kind smile. Just as Ilara was about to read from the fabricated documents, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the noise. "That won't be necessary, Ms. Sterling." A man in a simple grey suit, who had been standing quietly to the side, stepped forward. He moved with an unhurried confidence that commanded attention. It was Julian's private investigator, the one Julian had tasked with finding the source of the lies. He held a tablet in his hand. "My name is David Chen," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I am a forensic cybersecurity investigator. For the past week, I have been conducting an investigation into the origins of the documents Ms. Sterling is holding." Ilara's triumphant smile faltered. The reporters, sensing a new, more dramatic turn, swiveled their cameras toward the investigator. "These documents," Chen continued, his gaze locking onto Ilara, "are forgeries. Sophisticated ones, I'll admit, but digital fingerprints are hard to erase completely." He tapped his tablet, and a complex web of data appeared on the screen, which he angled toward the nearest news camera. "We trace the creation of these falsified police reports to a series of encrypted servers. However, the initial upload, the digital packet that started it all, originated from an IP address registered to a penthouse apartment at the Park Meridian." He paused, letting the information sink in. An apartment belonging to Ms. Sterling's personal assistant, paid for by a corporate account controlled by Ms. Sterling herself. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Ilara's face went white. "That's a lie! He's lying!" she shrieked, her composure shattering. But Chen wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he said, swiping to another screen, "we have financial records showing a payment of $200,000. Transferred from an offshore account owned by Ms. Sterling into a cryptocurrency wallet belonging to a known digital forger in Eastern Europe. The transaction was made 2 days before the story was leaked to the tabloids. The investment in this lie, it seems, was significant. The final nail was a security camera still from Ilara's office building, showing her assistant handing a large envelope to the very tabloid reporter who broke the story. The proof was irrefutable, a perfect, logical chain of evidence that dismantled her entire scheme in less than 60 seconds. The narrative had been flipped. The hunter was now the prey. The reporters turned on Ilara, their questions no longer about a homeless bride, but about conspiracy, fraud, and illegal manipulation of information to affect the stock market value of a major corporation. Publicly shamed, humiliated beyond recovery, Ilara crumbled. She dropped the papers, her face a mess of rage and disbelief as security guards politely but firmly escorted her away from the cameras and into the obscurity she had so desperately tried to inflict on another. Julian said nothing. He simply guided his fiancée through the now parted sea of reporters and up the courthouse steps. They walked through the grand marble halls, their footsteps echoing in the sudden, profound silence. The ceremony itself was a sterile, emotionless affair. They stood before a judge in a small wood-paneled room. They exchanged vows they didn't write and rings they didn't choose. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, there was no kiss, no joyous celebration. There was only the quiet scratch of a pen on a legal document. The contract was fulfilled. The Davenport empire, with its vast portfolio of stocks, bonds, and real estate assets, was secure. Julian's inheritance was his. They were married. She was now Mrs. Davenport, wife to a billionaire, a woman whose name was now legally tied to one of the largest fortunes in the country. Yet, as they walked out of the courthouse and back into the waiting car, she had never felt more alone. The victory was hollow, a strategic win in a war she didn't understand. She was tied to a man who had defended her in public but lied to her in private. A man who held the key to her past and refused to turn it. She had a new name, but she was no closer to knowing who she truly was. The ride back was a journey through a silent, frozen landscape of unspoken words. The city's vibrant life passed by the tinted windows, a world away from the sterile reality inside the car. He had won. His patrimony, the vast architecture of his family's fortune, was secure. She had a new name and the promise of $100 million, a sum so immense it was meaningless. But the victory felt like a defeat, a final closing of a door she had never even known was open. The driver did not take the familiar route back to the gleaming glass tower that had been her prison. Instead, he navigated toward the city's old financial district, a place of stone-faced buildings and quiet, generational wealth. Julian remained silent until the car pulled into a private subterranean garage beneath a building that bore no name, only a discreet, polished brass number. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice flat. "My real office," he replied, his tone different now. The detached corporate efficiency was gone, replaced by something heavier, something weary. "The penthouse is for show. This is where the real work is done." He led her through a series of secure doors into a space that was the complete opposite of his home. It was a warm, wood-paneled study filled with old books, antique maps, and the quiet hum of powerful hidden technology. It felt personal, lived in. It felt like his. He walked over to a heavy mahogany desk and turned to face her, his expression finally stripped of its guarded mask. For the first time, she saw the immense strain he had been under. "The contract is fulfilled," he began, his voice low. "My inheritance is safe, but that was never the primary objective." She stared at him, confused. "Then what was?" He took a deep breath, the kind a man takes before diving into treacherous waters. "The woman in your sketchbook," he said, his eyes meeting hers directly. "The face you drew. You asked me who she was, and I lied to you. I'm sorry for that. I had to. Her name was Eleanor Davenport. She was my grandmother." The name hung in the air between them. His grandmother. The kind face from her memory flash. The woman who smelled of turpentine and felt like safety was tied to this cold, secretive man. "She was a brilliant artist," Julian continued, his voice softening with a genuine affection that startled her. "Reclusive, private. She hated the world of finance and capital I was born into. She valued creation, not acquisition." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "And you were not just her caretaker. as I initially believed. You were her secret apprentice, her protégée, the daughter she never had. Every word was a seismic shock, rearranging the fractured pieces of her identity. An artist's apprentice. It felt right, a deep, resonant truth in her bones. My grandmother knew her health was failing. She also knew my uncle was a greedy, manipulative man who saw her personal fortune as just another asset to be absorbed into the corporate portfolio. So she created a complex, ironclad will to protect both her legacy and you. He walked over to a safe hidden behind a painting and pulled out a thick legal document. She left everything to you, he said, placing it on the desk. Her entire fortune, her art collection, her properties, her private investments in gold and other assets. It's a fortune that far, far exceeds the value of the company my uncle was trying to seize. She couldn't process the scale of it. A homeless girl, a Jane Doe, was the heir to a fortune she couldn't even imagine. But there was a clause, Julian said, his expression hardening. A poison pill designed to keep my uncle away. Her will stipulated that you could only inherit if you were, and I quote, safe and part of a stable family. My grandmother feared my uncle would try to have you declared incompetent or simply make you disappear to get his hands on the money. The entire insane puzzle began to snap into place. The marriage, the deadline. My uncle was the one who maneuvered that marriage clause into my grandfather's trust years ago, never believing I'd meet it. When my grandmother passed, he saw his chance to get everything. He thought he had me trapped. If I didn't marry, he'd get the company. He had no idea that by forcing my hand, he was creating the very condition needed to unlock a much larger treasure for you. The $100 million offer suddenly seemed like a pittance, a decoy. The money, she whispered, the $100 million. It was never a payment, he confirmed. It was a trust. Your money, to protect you, to give you resources in case something happened to me. It was the only way I could approach you without revealing the truth and putting you in even greater danger. My marriage proposal wasn't an act of desperation to save my inheritance. It was a desperate act to protect yours. The words hung in the air, a truth so staggering it felt more unbelievable than all the lies that had preceded it. She stood there, rooted to the spot in his quiet personal office, the world tilting on its axis. Every cold glance, every dismissive word, every moment he had stood by and let her be humiliated. It was all reframing itself in her mind, shifting from acts of cruelty to desperate, calculated moves in a high-stakes game of protection she never knew was being played. The fortune wasn't his, it was hers. The marriage wasn't a cage, it was a shield. My uncle, she began, her voice barely a whisper. He knew about me. About my connection to your grandmother? No, Julian said, his voice grim. He only knew she had taken on a young companion. He saw you as a nuisance, an obstacle. When my grandmother passed, he assumed you would simply disappear. When you turned up again on my arm, he saw you as a vulnerability he could exploit. He never once suspected you were the key to everything. Just then, a sharp, angry buzz came from the intercom on his desk. Julian's eyes flickered toward it, his brief moment of openness vanishing behind the familiar mask of control. He pressed the button. Yes? His assistant's voice was tight with alarm. Sir, your uncle is here. He's demanding to see you. He's unhinged. A cold, dangerous calm settled over Julian. He glanced at her, then at a small, discreet button on the side of his desk, which he pressed without a sound. A tiny red light, almost invisible, glowed for a second before fading. Let him in, Julian said, his voice like ice. He turned to her. Go into the adjoining archive room. Do not make a sound. No matter what you hear, this ends now. She didn't hesitate. slipping through a heavy wooden door disguised as a bookshelf just as the main office doors burst open. His uncle stormed in, his face a mask of purple rage, the feigned compassion from the park stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. "You think you've won?" he spat, his voice trembling with fury. "You think this sham marriage secures anything? I will contest the trust. I will expose this entire sordid affair. That little gutter snipe will be ruined, and you'll be a laughingstock." Julian remained perfectly still behind his desk, a bastion of calm against his uncle's storm. "It's over," he said simply. "You've lost. My grandmother saw to that." The mention of his mother seemed to push the uncle over an edge. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the quiet room. "Your grandmother was a sentimental old fool, hiding her wealth, scribbling away in that dusty studio with that stray she picked up off the street. I tried to warn her. I tried to warn the girl too." He took a step closer to the desk, his eyes glittering with a horrifying malice. "I told her to leave the city, offered her a handsome sum, but she was stubborn, just like my mother." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. "That accident wasn't an accident, you know. I hired some people. They were just supposed to scare her, rough her up a little, make her understand that she wasn't welcome here. But they got carried away. Still," he shrugged, a gesture of casual cruelty that made her blood run cold. "It worked out in the end, wiped her mind clean. It should have been the end of it." From her hiding place, she pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a scream. The blinding headlights, the screech of tires, the jarring impact. It wasn't a random tragedy. It was a planned attack, an attempt to erase her. Julian's face was carved from granite. "Thank you, Uncle," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "That's all I needed to hear." He gestured toward the corner of the room, where Arthur, his head of security, had entered silently, holding a small digital recorder. The red light on it was blinking steadily. The uncle's face went from rage to ashen horror as he understood what had just happened. He had not only confessed, but he had confessed to a crime that would strip him of everything: his social standing, his remaining influence, and his freedom. You recorded me?" he stammered, backing away. "Every word," Julian confirmed. "Conspiracy to commit assault, resulting in grievous bodily harm. Coupled with Ilara's testimony about your joint efforts to commit fraud and manipulate the market, I imagine you'll be trading your boardroom for a prison cell for a very long time. Your claim to any part of the Davenport capital, any asset or share, is finished." As Arthur escorted the now broken man out of the office, she slowly emerged from the archive room, her legs unsteady. The truth was a physical weight, a horrifying burden of what she had survived and what he had done to protect her. Julian came to her, his eyes filled with a regret so profound it was startling. "I am so sorry you had to hear that," he said, his voice raw. She looked at him, the man who had been her captor, her employer, her husband, and now her protector. The chasm of secrets between them had been filled with a terrible, clarifying truth. She reached up and touched the silver locket at her throat. "The numbers," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "What are they?" He led her to the desk and gently took the locket from her. "My grandmother loved codes and puzzles," he explained, his voice regaining its steady rhythm. "She trusted old-world security over anything digital. These numbers aren't a password for a Bitcoin wallet or an online account. They're far more tangible than that." He wrote the sequence down on a piece of paper. "It's the access key to a private vault at the oldest bank in the city, a vault registered under a name she used for her art dealings, a name no one in our family knew." And the next hour was a blur. They drove to the stone-faced bank, a fortress of old money and quiet discretion. In a silent, carpeted room deep below the ground, A bank official used the number sequence and a key Julian produced to open a heavy steel door. Inside the vault was a single large lacquered box. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. On top lay a thick, notarized document, Eleanor Davenport's last will and testament. Beneath it, nestled in a bed of faded velvet, was a small, leather-bound journal and a single, sealed envelope addressed in elegant, looping cursive to "My Starling." Her fingers trembled as she picked up the letter. It felt warm, a conduit to the past. Breaking the seal, she unfolded the pages. The words were not those of a wealthy matriarch dictating terms, but of a loving mentor speaking to her cherished protégé. "My dearest Starling," it began, and the nickname sent a jolt of recognition through her, a phantom echo of a voice she couldn't quite place. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the world has likely tried to swallow you whole. For that, I am endlessly sorry. I brought you into my quiet life to share my art, but I fear I also brought you into the orbit of my family's greed." The letter detailed Eleanor's growing fear of her son, Julian's uncle, describing his cold obsession with the family's capital and his disdain for her artistic pursuits. "He sees beauty only in a stock portfolio's bottom line," she wrote. "He cannot comprehend a wealth measured in color and light. He sees you as a complication, a loose thread in his grand financial tapestry. That is why I had to protect you this way. This fortune is not a gift. It is a shield. It is the freedom you deserve, built from a lifetime of my own work, a legacy of creation, not corporate conquest." Tears streamed down her face as she read the final lines. "I have told my grandson Julian of my intentions. He's a good man, though he hides his heart behind walls of steel and glass, much like the buildings he erects. He is more like me than he knows. Trust him. He will protect you. Live a beautiful life, my Starling. Fill the world with your art. That is my true inheritance." The letter gave her a past. The will gave her a future. But she still lacked a present. She still didn't know her own name. Julian watched her, his expression raw and unguarded. "There's one last place," he said softly. "The place it all began. My grandmother's studio." They drove out of the city, away from the concrete and steel, to a secluded property nestled in a grove of old oak trees. The studio was a converted barn, filled with light from a massive north-facing window. The moment Julian opened the door, she was hit by a tidal wave of sensation, the sharp, clean scent of turpentine and linseed oil, the sight of canvases stacked against the walls, some finished, some ghostly white and waiting, the familiar clutter of brushes in clay pots and palettes smeared with a rainbow of dried oil paints. It was home. She walked slowly into the center of the room, her hand trailing over a worn wooden easel, and then her memory returned, not in flashes but in a flood, a torrent of images and emotions that brought her to her knees. Her name was Clara. She remembered growing up in an orphanage, her only escape the sketches she drew in the margins of old books. She remembered meeting Eleanor Davenport at a local art fair, the old woman seeing a spark in her that no one else had. She remembered the years in this studio, not as a caretaker, but as a student, a daughter. The feeling of a paintbrush in her hand, the joy of mixing the perfect shade of blue, the sound of Eleanor's gentle laughter, and then a final, shocking memory clicked into place. A memory from months before the accident. Julian had come to the studio for a rare visit. He had stood in the doorway, awkward and out of place in his perfect suit, watching her paint. Their eyes had met across the room, and she remembered the jolt, the undeniable spark of connection that had passed between them, a silent acknowledgement that they were two lonely souls from different worlds. She remembered the faint, surprised smile he had given her, a smile she hadn't seen again until this very moment. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and full of a life reborn. "Clara," she whispered, My name is Clara." Julian knelt before her, his own eyes glistening with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "Clara," he repeated, and the name sounded like a prayer. The marriage, born of a desperate contract and shrouded in secrets, was now something else entirely. It was a foundation. He was no longer her savior, and she was no longer his nameless project. She was Clara, a powerful and brilliant artist, the rightful heir to a vast fortune built on creativity. He was Julian, the man who had risked his own empire to protect her legacy. They were equals. The story closes not in a sterile courthouse or a cold penthouse, but here, in the sun-drenched studio, surrounded by the legacy of love that had brought them together. The contract was fulfilled, but their real journey was just beginning. Julian picked up a clean brush, handing it to her. She took it, her fingers closing around it with a familiar certainty. Then her hand guided his as they approached a fresh, blank canvas together, no longer strangers bound by a deal, but partners, ready to paint a new future, their own masterpiece, side by side. If this story of resilience, hidden truths, and unexpected love moved you, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel for more stories like this, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Thank you for watching.